Welcome to another episode of 615 Unplugged. Today, we speak with lead pastor of Hope UC Nashville, worship leader, songwriter, and entrepreneur Dustin Smith. We cover a lot in this one. Not just about the church, but the real stuff behind it. Why relationships are harder to build today, how obedience shapes success, what it looks like to lead without ego, and why gathering in person matters more than ever. We talk faith, business, mentorship, disappointment, and the future of Hope UC. So, let's get into it. Pastor Dustin, brother, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, man.
How's everything with you?
It's good. Days have been filled with great stuff, very active, lots going on, and man, it's been a blast.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always surprised of hearing all of your travels. Every single day seems like you're in another part of the world. And so I'm sure we'll get into all of your crazy schedule and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start the episode with a quote I heard you say a few days ago. You were talking about the role of the church and the community and everything. And you said this one thing that really stuck out with me, which was that we've chosen rents over relationships. And I thought that might be a perfect place for us to start talking about your story and Hope UC and everything. And so maybe we use that as a starting point and you kind of flesh that out a little bit for us.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because I mean, I grew up in church, and which tells you a lot, when you meet somebody, you kind of find out a lot of probably how they were raised by some of their own actions. I say if you spend any time with people at all, you'll find most of them tell you who they are within just 10 to 15 minutes. It's like, because all of us carry some things that have start kind of becoming an identity for us. And me growing up in church, I found but when I was really young, they would do things, you did the potlucks and everybody get together and you get a table and all that kind of stuff. So it felt like when I was younger, it was like people got together more, they talked more, but even our culture, I say it turned from like this front porch, what you'd see in a lot of the, old shows of people sitting on a front porch, rocking in a chair, waving at everybody that goes by, and then it kind of moved from a front porch to a back porch culture to where it's like, hey, we're in the back patio, we're cooking out, we got friends over. Then it moved to an indoor culture, right? Which is like, we don't really have very many people over. We can't really fit people inside that much. And it started becoming kind of a little bit more like isolated. And COVID really, obviously did a work on us in that, and it kind of pushed everybody inside. But really, the church started losing that a long time ago, and we kind of started becoming isolated and kind of in our own islands. And so everything was, it almost seemed like even every other church was kind of almost in competition with churches. And it was like, you're coming up with these rants about people you never even sit and look in their eyes and talk to them, And so social media obviously makes that even easier because no longer are we sitting at a table together. We're just popping off our opinion. And then we're trying to do our best to get on everybody's post to try to give our opinion on everything. And we go on these huge rants. But my question is like, don't go on a rant on somebody's page you've never got to sit down with, And it's hard because social media makes everybody equal in intelligence, which everybody's not equal in intelligence. Not everybody's equal in experience, right? I got people trying to tell me how to run a business and never run a business. They're just great, they're great thinkers. And it's like, you can be a great thinker, but not know how to run a business because you might not have been around people. And that's why I love, the Mike Tyson quote. It's like everybody has a plan until you get punched in the mouth, And so the process for me is understanding I don't want to do anything in my life. If I'm doing business, if I'm doing my community at home around my neighborhood, if I'm doing church, I don't want to do anything where I start developing opinions about people or developing rants about situations that I'm not willing to first sit down at a table and have a conversation with somebody. And so, when we started the church, the big thing for me, the Hebrew word for table is the same Hebrew word for reconciliation. And so obviously then something needed to be reconciled, right? And so for us, most people will rant against people they need something reconciled with. They won't sit down at a table and process it with people. They just rant about it, which fixes nothing. And I think if you really want to have reconciliation in people's lives, Bible says that we're actually reconcilers to God. We reconcile people to God as if he's making his appeal through us as Christ ambassadors, right? So it's hard because most people choose the path of ranting, choose the path of giving their opinion, but a lot of times they don't even have an experience in the place that they're giving the opinion. And so a lot of them, even in our church, people will come from another church and they immediately start telling us what we need to change, what you need to do. And it's tough because when you're digging into it, they haven't even sat down and sat with you, looked in your eyes, asked you, hey,
Yeah.
what makes you you, what makes this. And it's important for us to recognize there's opportunities for us to sit with people and build relationship and connection. And that's why I always say, like, I've had people ask me, how do you handle criticism, because you get criticized, you're going to get criticized. Just if you're
Yeah.
not, I don't know if you're even doing a Christian thing. And
Yeah.
but I always say there are people who speak into me and there are people who speak to me. They're not the same people, right? So anybody can speak to me. I'll talk to anybody, but very few people get to speak into me. And the people who speak into me are the ones I have the most relationship with, because they're the ones who actually are trusted voices, in a sense of, like, if they're going to criticize me, they're criticizing me for my betterment. They're not criticizing me just for their betterment, right?
Yeah.
And most people are criticizing for their own betterment. They're not even looking, is this effective, right? And
Right.
it's difficult because people want to come in and they want to start making changes and implement things. It's like, hey, this could be a lot better run. This could be a lot better. It's like, well, I'm not looking for the best systems. I'm looking for the most effective place, the most effective
Yeah.
things. And it's not always the same thing.
And that, just making that difference of like who can speak to you versus who can speak into you, I think that the biggest thing there is time, right? Like that takes so much time
Yes.
to differentiate and to get to that point of being able to speak into somebody's life, right? And so,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
just unfortunately, and I think we're all guilty of this at some point or another. We sometimes just don't want to spend that amount of time or want to put into it, or we just don't. Not that we don't want to, but we just don't. And so we miss out on some of those relationships that could develop into that point, like you said, right?
Yeah. Well, because part of it, we actually may be right in our rant. And so we just drop these bombs as if it's going to do something. But, there's something about relational authority, and most people just fight out of positional authority. And that relational authority changes everything. And most people say, well, I don't have the time for that. I was like, no, if you will spend that time, you will be 10 times more effective, right?
Hmm.
But the problem is they're keep fighting through the same battles, and it's important. I talk to business leaders all the time. It's like, you can't look at them as workers. You got to realize there's something that God has placed in your hands to steward people, even people who don't believe in God. Doesn't mean he didn't give it to you. It just means you haven't acknowledged it yet. So there's something
Yeah.
about, Jay John always said, even atheists, he said, God doesn't believe in atheists. So, which I always love that statement. And but I think the ability to help people understand, like, you have a responsibility to the people you're with, and it's not just to get the job done, it's to actually invest in people. It's one of the hardest things is time, right? So there's a great, I don't know if you know Tony Dungy. He was a
Yeah.
he was a coach, and was a coach for the Colts for a long time. I was a big Colts fan growing up, born in Indianapolis, and he was working with a bunch of young guys who kind of came from the streets and struggled, and he said the hardest part wasn't training them. The hardest part was convincing them they were worth training,
Yeah.
because nobody had ever spent time with them. And he
Yeah.
said, so I took the time, and one of the guys who won a Super Bowl under Dungy said, the thing that was the biggest for me is, he said, never in my entire life have anybody ever told me they were proud of me. You're the first person to ever tell me you were proud of me. And I thought,
Yeah.
how much time does it take to stop and look in somebody's eyes and say, I'm proud of you?
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah,
so
on
it's
Tony
time, right?
Dungeon, I remember a very long time ago. Man, I'm gonna butcher this, but I think his book is called Quiet Strength or something like that. He had a book and I read it a long time ago, and in it, something similar. He talks about going into the locker room and realizing that like locker room talk, and he wasn't willing to curse and all of that stuff. And so like
Yeah.
how does he get them to listen to him and all of that stuff? But it was just like this whole process, and he talks about it in the book, and it was very, very insightful. So yeah.
Yeah. but he's willing to take the time, right? And I think the hard thing is we all just want to get to work. It's like, hey, they're here to play football. They're not here for me to tell them I'm proud of them. But the I'm proud of them is what made them better football players, right? Because it made them feel like they were part of family, not just a part of a team. There
Yeah.
was something about it that him taking the time did 10 times as much as him just getting them to do harder workouts, pushing them harder, and because then what happens is like the fatherless generation, they fight for applause because they never got attention. Right. And
Hmm.
so even the dads were too busy to stop for a second and tell their kid they're proud of them. And that's what we
Yeah.
have to change.
Because everybody, and I heard this quote once of like everybody's worried about giving their kids what they didn't have instead of teaching them what they wish they would have been taught, you know? And
Yeah.
it's true, man. Like you kind of go in and it's easy to get caught up in that, like provide all of these things rather than some of taking the time, which is what all of the time, all of these people, old, you talk to anybody that is old and you go, what are some of the regrets? It's never about possessions. It's never about any of these things. It's all about, I wish I had taken a better time for this or more
Yeah.
time for that or more time with my family. And it's like, but we keep on making the same mistakes all over and over, even though
Yep.
the advice is still coming down
Yep.
generation after generation. We
Yep.
just don't get it, you know?
Yep. Well,
Um,
I was reading a book. I wish I could remember the name. I was reading two at the same time. One of them was called The War on Boys, and they're both psychology books. And it was interesting because they were making the argument in psychology, and they were saying like it's a proven study that the number one way for kids to overcome addiction, overcome depression, anxiety, fear, they name like seven or eight things, even grade levels, the number one way to overcome all those things, family dinners. And
wow.
they make the argument that when we stop spending time with our family around the table, we stop learning how to deal with situations, right? Because at round tables is where we learn, like, oh man, they went through stuff. Oh, tell me a story. Like what happened? What happened today? And our kids like started saying, hey, this is what happened. The problem is we lost it in the church too, right? We stopped doing potlucks. Potlucks weren't a cool thing anymore. So we stopped eating together and we stopped. So wherever the table is lost, connection's lost, right?
Yeah.
And you realize like, man, I gotta get my kid in counseling. Gotta get my kid. Maybe. No, I'm not saying that's not even healthy, right? But I am saying like your kid's battling depression, maybe start with family dinners. You think that's too simple, but it's not. It's taking time. They're not sitting alone eating dinner in their room. They're not just sitting on a couch while you're watching TV, And it's like, man, we're just
Yeah.
so exhausted when we get home. And it's like, I know, but you gave everything to work, right?
Mm.
So pick it up, grab yourself, like whatever you got to do, pick yourself up and give more and invest more in your family. And you will see such a return of energy, right? You will see
Yeah.
a return of life because the things at home shouldn't drain you. They should be life giving, but you've removed yourself from giving it energy. And God's saying, like, set the table again.
And it's about, what you're saying. It's hard, right? It's after a long day or anything, it's hard. But guess what? Not doing it also leads to hard, which is it's kind of like that age old like pick your hard, right? Like
Yeah.
eating healthy is hard. Getting sick is also hard,
Yeah. Yeah.
Working on your marriage is hard. Getting divorced is also hard.
Yes.
So like you
Yes.
take your pick. You choose
Yes.
which kind of hard is you want to have in life.
Yeah, no
Um
doubt.
maybe we can kind of zoom out a little bit because I think you've mentioned business. We've talked about church. I know that you have this incredible background in ministry of music and everything. And something that I would love for you to kind of talk about is how you see yourself managing all of these things, right?
Yeah.
How you see the intersection of all of these things. And usually I can ask somebody if let's say if they're a photographer and they're in business, I can usually ask them like, do you think you're a creative that is in business or a business person that tends to be creative? Like in your case, you have this third
Mhm.
other thing, which is ministry, which is completely different in many ways, but not in others, from business and creative things. So maybe kind of touch a little bit on how you see yourself navigating those three, where you identify them the most, all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the key is that, a lot of people they want to put you in a box because it's easier to define you, right? And it says like, well, now I know who they are, right? But my kids know who I am, and it flows through every aspect of my being. So when I get up to be a pastor, I don't have to be somebody different than I was as a dad, right? When I go into business, I don't do anything different than I would have managed in my home, right? I just do it in a little bit different. Maybe there's a different way or all that kind of stuff. When I write songs, if I'm writing sermons, I'm writing songs. It just comes out with a melody, right? There's aspects of it that we have actually I think, poorly done where we divided everything out. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, what do you do for a hobby? And it's like, I'm actually kind of doing my hobby. Like, this is what I do for a hobby. And they're like, well, what do you do for work? And I was like, well, it kind of is what I do for work, but it doesn't feel like work. It feels like this is what I'm born to do, you know? And they want to differentiate it because they go, well, how do you get away from work? And it was like, well, I don't really necessarily separate that. I think I know what they're saying, but the truth is like when you function in a way and you're fully okay with how you function, humility is not about thinking less of yourself, right? Humility is about understanding what God has given you and then you being okay with that. I don't have to fight for more. I don't have to fight to be more. I don't need to be on another stage to prove it. I don't need to be on any of this stuff. And you realize like David never separated the shepherd from the worshiper from the king, right?
Mm.
What actually made him very good at business was that God looked down and he was like, man, if this guy will put his life on the line for sheep like this, and if this guy will sing out here like this, I can trust him with a tabernacle that never stops for 30 some years, 24/7. I can trust this guy with people because I could trust him with sheep. And there was something birthed in David that didn't separate out because God knew he'll treat the kingship like he treated the shepherd, right? He'll treat the tabernacle like he treated the individual level of worship. And there's something that God starts gifting us with when we're okay with where we're at to start adding to the things that we have. And I never expected to do business, but what God did in me is he said, I want you to always be a learner. And so when I got invited into the business realm, the business world, I actually was invited to lead worship for their Sunday thing, but they would do a Friday, Saturday business event, and then I would lead worship for their Sunday thing, but they'd want me to come in and maybe share on leadership for one night or something. Well, I showed up all day, every day for all of their teachings. And they would be like, you don't have to be here. I was like, no, I know. I just want to know you guys. Well, I started writing down every business book they did, right? I started writing down every idea they said. Not because I wanted to do their business, because I thought, man, this is brilliant. I don't know this stuff. This is amazing. Not knowing that someday God was going to ask me to step into an arena of entrepreneurship or into business. And so what I started learning is that, man, the hunger that I have for the word of God is the hunger I have for understanding, right? And God's then saying like, hey, I love this position you've taken in life and the humility that you walk with, and me saying like, I don't need to do business. And God's like, well, that's kind of why I need you to, because the people who are so driven by it, they never let me drive, you know? And I'm like, Lord, I don't really know what I'm doing here. And he's like, perfect. You're the perfect candidate, like, and then he starts giving you ideas and he starts putting you around people who are good at what they do. And for me, I think I never drew that line between sacred and secular. I used to, right? But this is the thing where God's like, I want to redeem all things and I want you to participate in this. And so it's like, what area do you want me to do? And then God starts, I found the only reason I started writing songs because my pastor preached a message I could not find a song for. So I wrote a song because I knew we got to sing this message and I can't find it. So I wrote it based off his notes. First song I ever wrote was for that, and I used his notes to do it. And our church sang the snot out of it. I mean, they loved it. So I was like, I guess I should write more like this. And I don't even know what I was doing. I just knew what felt good and sounded good to me. So I would just do that. And then I'd introduce another song. In that first year, I probably wrote 40 songs, and our church started singing all of them. Well, then other church started hearing them, and then other church started singing them. And then I had Integrity Music call and say, like, hey, we've been listening to your songs. We'd love to talk to you about possibly doing this in Nashville. And I was like, I don't even know what that means, Like I didn't know anything about Nashville. But the thing was like I was diligent with the moment that God had given me, not to write songs, but to put a message into people. And so God said, man, Dustin's willing to do something he doesn't know what he's doing to make sure the message that was just spoken by that guy lives longer than the moment that was spoken. Now it's not spoken to them, it's spoken through them, right? And so
Yeah.
my heartbeat has always been for people. I'm always asking our team, like, but did you look in their eyes? Like, but did you look around? Then God says, like, oh, I need you to go into this business thing because you're willing to look in their eyes and see if they're okay, right? So I just did a big business event with somebody, that's from our church. Went out and spoke to some of their top leaders, and one of the things, like I did a business talk, I did a leadership talk the first day. I didn't talk about the Bible, I didn't talk about that stuff. And afterwards, the guy said one of the guys in his thing would probably consider himself agnostic. And he came up to him and he goes, I hope that guy speaks more. He said, if I lived in Nashville, I'd go to that church. This guy didn't even say he believes in God, right?
Right.
But the thing was when I walked into the room, I didn't separate myself. I did a leadership talk, but that leadership talk carried something beyond just leadership, right?
Right.
The Spirit of God is on it. And so for me, I told God, I don't want to be different in that room than I am in this room here. I don't want to be different in this room than I am at home with my kids. And so when you can build that consistency in, then God starts walking you through doors. I never walked into the door if I need to do business. Never. I actually never walked in the door saying I needed to be a pastor. You know, I just told God I'm available. And when that opportunity starts to present itself, I won't become another person to do that. And God's like, that's what I need. I need you to be a shepherd. I really need you to be a shepherd in the tabernacle. I need you to be a shepherd in the king's palace, and I need you to be a shepherd in the field. That's all I need from you. And I was like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah. It's interesting because as you're saying that you didn't want to change who you were, right? Like you didn't want to be different for all of these things. I was actually, as you were talking, that I was thinking the opposite. Your willingness to evolve and become something that you were not, right? Like
Yeah.
learn business because you did not know it. Learn how to write music and because you did not know it. Learn how to do this and like I guess it's both, right? Both it's yeah, you're not losing your core of who God made you, but
Yeah.
within that willingness to say this is who I am, right? Like I'm not just the guy that writes music. You were willing to kind of grow past that
Yes.
without losing
Yeah.
who you were, and then become a pastor, and then grow into the business and grow. And it's like God says, okay, cool. Like I can work with this.
Yes.
I can move forward with this. So
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful way to put it because what wasn't willing to change is my desire, right? To help people and to serve God. That's what wouldn't change. My character wouldn't change, right?
yeah,
My desire for finances didn't change. All of a sudden I see a way for more finances and it was like, sweet, that's more for us to give the church. When we started doing our traveling ministry, God really started blessing it. But for me, I ended up turning that money into buying a property we could put a church on. Like you would think that would have been like, man, this is a financial blessing of God. I could build a bigger place to do more ministry in and get my own house and all this kind of stuff. And we did it. We turned it into a church, and it's like, you don't have to do that. And it's like, yeah, but this is what God's put on my life, and the beauty of it is this is the most fulfilling thing I'll ever do because it's something that lives beyond me. And I would say this, like, the power of this too is that as we're journeying through this, is that there's something that God starts to do that causes you to not fall in love with the tool he placed in your hand. Like, I think that's the problem is like, when you have dreams, typically they'll tell you if you have a dream and you're in a vehicle or something, your vehicle is typically your ministry or your business or something. Your vehicle represents an occupation or something that you do in life. So if you have a dream and you keep finding yourself in a certain vehicle, right? Or ministry is a tool in your hand, right? So people will say like, well, there's no such thing as a worship leader in the Bible. It's like, well, that's not totally true. It's called a pastor, right? This is a pastor that uses worship as one of his weapons of choice, right? That uses music as his weapon of choice. But here's the problem. People tend to fall in love with their tools. And if you fall in love with the tool, you're a weirdo. Like, I mean, even master builders don't sleep with tools. Like I got guys who are master builders and they don't go to bed with their hammer uh like I just want to take care of you. I love you so much. Like what? No, this hammer is not the goal. The building is the goal, right?
yeah,
The building of something bigger than the tool. And most of us think the tool is the goal. And so we fall in love with these tools. And so God can't trust us with anything else because he's like, what? You weirdo, you're gonna fall in love with another tool. I can't even trust you. I can't trust you. You're gonna sleep with a hammer. Like I can't even give you a screwdriver. Like what are you doing? And I think that
Yeah.
that's the key for us. Is like I'm never in love with the tool. Now I take care of the tool, right? Because you want to sharpen it. You want to make sure it's clean. You want to make sure it's good to go. I want to invest in it. I need to know how to use the tool to the best of my abilities. So that's where I start studying more, right? So how do I swing the sword, Lord? How do I swing the sword of business if I've never been in a business? I've never run a business. He was like, I'm going to put you around people. I want you to listen. I'm going to train you. I want you to see the word of God differently. I want you to put these lenses on. They're like, okay, you're going to have to teach me something. So I'm willing to adjust in that way because I'm willing
Yeah.
to grow, right? But I'm not willing to change who I am and start falling in love with tools that God gave me to build something with. And now I'm using them for my own edification.
Yeah. So Hope You See now has been around for a little over 5 years, if I'm not
6 years.
mistaken,
Yeah,
right?
just hit 6 years in October.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So throughout that process, obviously, um, there's definitely success is rarely kind of like a straight line up. There's like ups, downs, setbacks, all of that stuff. What are some of I like to call these favorite failures, which are the things that in the moment felt like, I can't believe this is happening, but looking back, you're like, man, thank God that didn't work out, because if not, all of that stuff. And I'm
Yep.
curious to see what are some of those things that, as you look back on your career, as you look back on Hope You See's history, everything, what are some of those things that come to mind that you go, thank God for that failure? Because in
Yeah.
the moment it sucked, but right now, thank God.
Well, one of the biggest ones was we were renting a property, a few miles from here, and there was a beautiful 40-acre property right next to it that the guy who we were renting this building from owned. And their names were Jay and Myrtle, typical Southern couple, and they're in their 80s or something. And so uh, I was like, man, I really have a dream of building a barn, and like, which has always been the dream, right? And man, I would love to have that property to do that on. And instead of renting from them, we could do that, rent from them while we're building out this property, right? And so we were there for about a year. And so I finally went to Gina and I was like, I think I'm going to go talk to them and ask if they'd be willing to sell that 40 acres to us, because they still had like 20 other acres that we were on, And so I went over, had a 2 hour meeting with them. It was awesome. And Jay looks at me and he was like, I'd like for you to have it. I think you need to have it. He goes, I'd be willing to finance it even. You don't even have to worry about financing. And I was like, this is beyond good. And I was like, how much for 40 acres in this area? He goes, how about 1.5? I was like, 1.5 million for 40 acres? And he was like, I would do that for you. And I was like, and you'll finance it? And he's like, yep. And this was on a Monday. And I was like, you know what? I'm in. And I was like, we shook hands. Like, this is the deal. And I was like, I'm in. I can't sign papers till Friday because my board's coming in Friday. They're all for this. I've already talked to them. They're good to go. If this is a deal, they'd be more than for this. So I would say, yes, we just shook hands. This is a deal. I'll sign the paperwork on Friday when they're here. Does that work? He's like, that's fine. I'm not in a rush. The next day, I'm at a songwrite and I get a text from Myrtle. And Myrtle says, hey, Dustin, it's Myrtle. The city came and offered us double for the land. We took it. Sorry, it's gone. And I was like, what the heck? I walk out of the songwriter. I was like, what just happened?
No.
This is the property we've been dreaming of. This is the thing. And we're already invested in these guys. And I felt like I just got stolen from. I just got stolen from. The enemy just stole something from me. I kind of went into like warfare and intercession. And I called my wife and she was like, oh man. She was like, I'm so sorry. And I was like, sorry? That's not the thing to say right now. And start calling down fire from heaven. Like this needs to be consumed. Like we need to figure that. I'm gonna go stand on that property or do something to it, like and she's like, okay. And I was like, man, what a bummer. Like this is stupid. And so the next day I was riding with my wife and she's like, hey, I'm really sorry. And I was like, for what? And she was like, I know you really wanted that property. And it hit me like hard. And I was like, well, I didn't want it for me. I wanted it for us. And she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, did you not think we were supposed to have it? She's like, well, I wasn't so sure. And she's like, but it just really felt like you wanted it. I was like, well, yeah, I want it for us. And I just felt the Lord like the enemy didn't take anything from you. I asked you to move forward. I asked you to do that. I asked you to go ask him for the land. And this is about obedience. This is not about success, how you think success is. Obedience is success. I've always said that, right? Okay. And I felt this settling inside of me like, you know what? Maybe this isn't what God has for us. Like the next week, I get a call from several people, and they kept bringing it up. But Daniel Peterson, who's been in our church now for a while, Daniel said, hey, have you heard that Homestead Manor's for sale? And I was like, bro, Homestead Manor's out of our league. He's like, you should at least go look at it. So I was like, okay. So I brought my wife over. We walked through the house. And when we walked out of the back of the house and we saw that barn, we both started crying. She started crying because she knew I was going to go for it. I started crying because I knew it was the right property. And those, now the story is written. We ended up getting this property, crazy story. But the whole point of it for me was like, man, I can't even imagine. They told me it would probably have taken at least 3 years just to get a building up on that property. Like
Mm.
even the city's been fighting to get something up, and the city runs it, and they still have not been able to
Wow.
get it all built out, right? And that's 6 years later, they still haven't gotten it built out, right?
Wow.
And so for us, we realized like, oh man, God really rescued us in that. But I really think God was in me asking for it because God said, I just needed to know your faith level, right? And
Right.
that faith level and even the disappointment of not getting the land, which I would have called a failure at the time, was actually the launching pad to the next property God had for us. And God knew he could trust us because I was willing to go in. And then when I felt that release of like, hey, it's okay. That wasn't yours. You did not get stolen from. I just released it. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I bless them then. Whatever that is, I bless them. And then God blesses us with the 50-acre property, few million dollars more. But we raised $1 million in 40 days and, was able to take on this property and put a business on it that last year saw 200,000 people come through the property. We
Right.
got a bench program here for people who are battling suicide, depression, anxiety. We have a church that we can't fit people in, that sits outside and all kinds of stuff. And so all of that right there happened initially by a property I got rejected on.
Do you think Hope You See feels the same way that it does anywhere else? Or how much of it do you feel like it's just because of where we are, like it's just is what it is because of where we are?
Every time you think you're the only one, you start hearing stories about someone else who's in it, and you're like, it's was it Elijah where he's like, hey, I have these people reserved. You're not the only one, you know? And
Right.
so I think it's incredibly unique. I definitely think it's unique. I think that the part of the reason is because what people want to do is identify you, like even the books that are coming out about here's how to have a successful church. They've got the programs down, they've got the stuff down, but they would tell you like once you're 80% full, you need to start another service and all that. People aren't going to come past 80% full and all that kind of stuff. And we're like, well, we're at 120% full, maybe 130% full, and people are still coming. So yeah, there's probably a point to that, but I think God put us in this spot to kind of keep us from being able to be some of the things to prove a different story out too. Not that those things are wrong. I don't even think some people who are doing that are doing it really well and really successful. I just think you have to start asking the Lord, but is that what you want us to do? That's
Yeah.
what's more rare. It's not about how the church is necessarily succeeding in however it is, because in some ways it doesn't look successful, because we're not able to keep on adding a bunch of people the way we're doing it. And that obviously will change in some of the things that God's placed in our hearts and expansion and stuff. But it probably won't change in the way that the typical book would tell you to change it, you know? And
Right.
and I think what's more rare is people willing to ask God, is this what you want? Even after reading a book, hey, do you want us to go this route? Because we're willing to, but if you don't want us to, it's okay. But we need you to speak to us though. That I
Yeah.
think is more rare than anything.
Yeah. And the thing that obviously now having been in Hope You See for 5 months or so, one of the things that I find the most unique is it doesn't matter who's leading, who's preaching, who's in town, who's not in town, it feels exactly the same way as any other Sunday, right? Which kind of, I would love for you to kind of talk about, um, and this is very relatable to business as well, right? It's like being able to delegate, being able to like not be this, bottleneck for anything, or maybe speak about how you handle that in all these different assets and
Yeah.
facets of what you handle.
Yeah. Well, our culture is so unique compared to biblical culture, right? That's what makes it difficult. And you can't really have a hard change because the systems run differently, everything kind of runs differently. But a lot of what we've taken on as the church is a top-down model, and I think it's a very poor model. I think the way the biblical church was modeled was after families, after fivefold ministry, and basically whoever was the pastor of it would have been called the first among equals, and the first among equals would have walked side by side with other mothers and fathers, and them being able to speak into the community and them helping guide the community and lead the community. Business is a little bit the same way because remember back, in those days, kids didn't even, one of my concerns for young adults is they wrestle this thing out of like, what's my calling? What's my gifting? And then they're digging through the Bible trying to figure out the calling of God on their life. Like, do I need to be a nurse? Do I need to be a veterinarian? Do I need to be, and you're like, well, the Bible wasn't really written to speak to that because the young people of those days would just do whatever their parents were doing. Jesus was a carpenter because his dad was a carpenter. It wasn't because Jesus was like, what do I want to do with my life when I grow up? If Jesus wasn't a carpenter, the community didn't get a carpenter, and they bartered and they helped each other. And there was this unity of the community working together that if you didn't have a farmer, then the whole town didn't eat. If you didn't have consistent carpenters, the whole town didn't have a carpenter, right? And so you would have generations of carpenters being raised up. So their mentality was more based around fathers raising up sons, mothers raising up daughters, families unifying together, coming together, saying, how do we do this? And I'm not saying they had a perfect thing going because there were a lot of issues. That's why most of the New Testament was written. But the ability for us to realize, hey, I have leaders around me that are better than me at things, and I'm okay with that. I just need to make sure they have carte blanche to be able to speak into me, speak into things, speak into the direction, and give them a voice in the church. And it's one thing to tell people like, hey, I want you to be empowered here. It's another thing to actually empower them, you
Mm,
know? And so when we started this whole thing, I was a little concerned because I knew the calling on my life is still to do some traveling, which we talked about earlier, and some of the callings of God to say, hey, you need to go and do some of these things. So I told Pastor Darlene Check, Pastor Mark, and Darlene, I said, I'm a little concerned about starting this because I know I'm still supposed to do some traveling. Doesn't mean I have to travel all the time. It just means I know I'm still supposed to do some. And Darlene said, good, you'll never build the church on yourself. And it was so freeing when she said that. I was like, yeah. And here's the thing, you know how this is. When you're at home, even the kids and even the wife, like all this stuff, there's certain things they let you just take care of because you're dead. When you're there, there's just certain things I do. I'm going to lock the door. I turn out the light, not because there's any code or because, this is a man thing or a woman thing. It's just what I take on. If somebody breaks in the house, you know who's going to be responsible to take that guy out? It's going to be me. Like I'm gonna be the guy to get shot. This is the way it is, and they think I'm a lot stronger than I am. So there's a chance I'm going to lose this fight. I don't know, but I'm going to at least fight. And but when I'm not at home, right? Who there's no way to just rely on me getting the job done.
yeah,
Somebody else has to step into it. And I think in a great controlled environment in a sense, and I think you know what I mean by controlled, just by a safe environment,
yeah,
and as people who like you who actually been a part of us longer than 5 months, you've just been here for 5 months, right? It's
yeah.
beautiful because when you first came in, you're like, what you actually feel is a little bit of safety and some protection in that of like, oh man, I feel like it's a pretty safe place. Like, well, what that is it's people being able to walk together. It's not just one man doing all the things, and it's like, man, when that guy's here, it's awesome. But when he's not, it's kind of like, like, no, this is about from the beginning. We had multiple people be able to be carriers of this. We have multiple voices speaking into it. And you can feel the strength of mothers and fathers actually pushing to see people being empowered, strengthened, encouraged. And I think that that's actually a more biblical model. Even in business and leadership, you realize the businesses that I see that are succeeding the most long-term legacy are ones who invest in other people starting to take the reins to do things and have an empowerment. The ones that are starting to like crumble and aren't doing as well or always feel like they're a struggle are the ones that are always about the man and everybody
Yeah.
else is the employee, right? And
Yeah.
those systems are crumbling. Even in our culture, we're finding the Google model and some of those where people are like coming in, they get to have a say. You know, the schedules are changing. They're not as dominated by the 9 to 5 and things like that. It's like, hey, we want you to be creative. We want you to do this kind of stuff. The Western education model is starting to fall apart a little bit, you know, of like, oh man, we're not all going to be factory workers. We don't all need to be
Mhm.
average and all this stuff, you know? And so that's a
Or
whole
even
other
more
thing.
recently, like we don't all have to be computer coders now because now AI has
Yeah.
completely wiped that out. It's like, oh my God, all these careers that everybody was like, they thought they needed. Now it's
Yeah,
like
right.
they were the first ones to go out. You know,
First
it's like
ones,
all of a
yeah.
sudden becoming a plumber is like that much
Yeah.
more.
Plumbers and electricians, baby. We're gonna
Yeah,
need you the rest of our lives. AI ain't gonna take that on.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
So, well, I think that one of the things that, as you mentioned, obviously I've been kind of, I found out about the church 3 years ago and everything. But one of the things is that every single time we came into town before moving and everything, like I said in the beginning, it just felt like Hope You See. It felt exactly like Hope You See. Um, it's always different in a weird way, but that's the thing about Hope You See, right? And
yeah.
so I just want to say thank you for at least being the one that God is using to establish this and all of that, because I know I speak for myself and my family has been an incredible blessing for us.
Thanks.
Being able to move here and not knowing anyone, not knowing anything except this church is going to be our home thing, and from there we go, from
Yeah,
there
that's
we figure
awesome.
it out. And so I think that kind of shows you a little bit of what thank God we have as a group.
Yeah, that's
So
awesome, man.
um looking back, you talked about being in some of these business meetings and learning, and I'm sure there you have no shortage of mentors who have guided you both in business but also in ministry and music, all of that stuff. What are some of those m people, books, moments that have most impacted your life and who you realize you are today?
Yeah, well, I would say first, my father-in-law has been an amazing example for me. I think of his, he's a theologian, he's a teacher, he's definitely different than me in every way in that, the depth of what he carries and the wisdom and the experience. And so, first it's those who are closest to you, And then I had an amazing in Kansas City, probably one of the best preachers I've ever heard, I got to be under him as a pastor and a leader and watch how he communicated the word of God and championed and challenged certain things, that I was like blown away by. And then getting into the business world, there were people that part of this business system, which was actually Amway, was what it was, when we got in. Well, we're still doing it with them. We're not in Amway, but they've asked us to just be a part of the journey. And some of them, I watched them as leaders actually really care for people. And it was one of the first times I'd ever seen somebody who ran such a big business kind of thing that actually leaned into helping people and was even like, hey, if you're not supposed to do the business side of it, that that's really not probably why you're here. You're really probably here because you need to find Jesus. And I was like, who says that? If you're really trying to push a business, that's the last thing you want to say.
Yeah.
And so that's been really encouraging for me. I absolutely love reading N.T. Wright, a great theologian. I feel like just an amazing person of our day. And then I love digging into leadership things and just listening to different podcasts and stuff like that. But I'm the kind of person, I'm a learner. Like I want to learn. And so I almost feel like there's never something that I sit in where I don't get something from it. I'm always asking myself, can I walk away with at least one thing from somebody who's even new or younger? And I'm listening to some of these young adults and I'm listening to them and they're like, oh, you probably heard all of this. I was like, yeah, but I've never heard it from you. Like you
Mm.
carry something so different and your experience and your heart. And so to be honest with you, like I feel like at times I'm being mentored by my kids. And some people would hate to admit that. the beauty of it is we poured so much into them over the years. Now God's giving them their own experiences, and it's partnered with something that I already put into them. And so I'm seeing an expansion of something I never dreamed I'd have, you know? And so all the things my mom and dad put in me, all the things that I've learned from the people around me, I realize like I just want to learn, you know? And so I find every moment that I can to be a learner.
Yeah. What is something that you're trying to learn right now?
Um, well, it's something that I've probably been on the journey with the longest since I encountered the presence of God is that I was talking to our staff the other day and I said, I'm trying to learn more and more that heaven's not a place, that it's a realm. And we're always fighting to get somewhere. And Jesus steps on the scene and he says, the kingdom of God is among you and the kingdom of God is within you. And we always think of heaven as a place because we're the kind we need. I love in Book of Revelation it says, and the temple was measured out to be so many cubic feet. And I asked, it said in human measurement, and I asked the Lord, like, why did you put that in the Bible? Why? Like, I know what cubic feet are. Why did you say in human measurement? And I felt the Lord say, because I have to dumb everything down for you, you know. And I realized, like, heaven, you know, when Paul says to be absent from the body is present with the Lord, we struggle with that a little bit because we think it means we go to a place instead of be fully aware of a realm we weren't fully aware of before, right? Our
Hmm.
bodies are no longer the limits. And healing is closer than you think it is. God's closer than you think he is. His breath is closer than you think it is. And you shouldn't have to fight to get to it. It's your inheritance, you know? And so it's hard because as people of flesh and as people of humanity, we have to define things because then all of a sudden, well, heaven can't be, maybe heaven's not a place you go to right away. So we create purgatory or something. You know, it's like, well, maybe you go there first and it's a because we need a place. That's who we are, right? And
Right.
and Jesus comes and he was like, this is all right here among you. And I want to understand it better, but I think you understand it by experiencing it, you know? And Jesus is like, this is something that you'll never fully grasp or understand, right? Until you take your
Yeah.
last breath and you're just fully enveloped. And heaven actually, they considered heaven God's dwelling, not God's dwelling place, but just the dwelling of God. And so in Eden, there was no separation, right? But there was a
Right.
fracture in Eden. So I'm just trying to learn even more as a pastor, as a leader. When we talk about this, you know, heaven come close, we're not actually asking it to come from a distance in, we're actually asking for the revelation of the closeness of this. And so the cool thing about that is then that doesn't just happen when I'm in a church service. That gets to happen when I'm in a business meeting. And right before I walk up, I tell God, like, will you help me like tear the veil a little bit for them? Because I know the veil's been torn, but the enemy's kind of put it back over their eyes. You know, Corinthians says, the weapons we fight with are not of this world, but they're powerful to demolish every stronghold, argument, pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. So the veil that was torn was meant to be torn for everyone, and then the enemy comes back in and builds up walls, right? And it's our
Right.
responsibility to demolish those walls. And I'm just trying to figure out how to do that better. I want to help people more, and I want to make sure that I'm not the hindrance to somebody experiencing God.
Love it. The church having been around for 5, 6 years, looking forward the next 5, 6 years, what do you see coming down the pipe?
Um, I see I see the gathering becoming important again. It's starting to not become important. I think, you know, and I mean the gathering by people actually gathering with each other, knowing each other. And then I see people carrying everything that they've learned and everything that they have out into the marketplace. And I feel like there's going to be so much marketplace ministry and people who are trying to do away with the church or the gathering place. It's very dangerous because where do those people go once they get saved, right? And once
Right.
they give their lives to Jesus, they're looking for the community of faith again. And I see it expanding. I think for Hope UC, I see an expansion of kingdom outposts being placed in cities all over. And churches will no longer just be a meeting place for Sunday, but they're going to be the gathering place of equippers. And it's going to be the gathering place of an army that's basically going to go out with pure love, faith, joy, life, and those will be I always say joy is your weapon, thanks is your battle cry. And the weapon's not of this world, you know. And you're going to walk out and there's going to be kingdom outposts where we come together to encourage, equip, train generations of lovers of Jesus that then infiltrate the streets. And I think churches are going to become housings again of a resource place where people are going to be able to come. Look, when we got 1819, one of the beautiful things about this, I felt God say, I'm going to restore some things of the church. This is a great picture of it. The house here is built in 1819. It's 200 years old. And it was first a house, then it was a post office, then it was a general store, it was a hospital because of the Civil War. And then recently it was a restaurant. And God said, I'm going to restore all of those things to the church. It's going to be a place where you are fed. It's going to be a place where you are healed. It's going to be a place where you receive messages as a post office, you give messages, receive messages. It's going to be a general store where needs are going to be met. There's going to be needs that are met here. And then it's going to be a home for people. And God's prophetically restoring a property that had thousands die on it in war and blood shed on the property. And he's using it as a prophetic picture of no
Yeah.
longer his brother fighting brother. But I mean, we have a story of a brother in the Civil War, North and South. One was on the North, one was on the South, and they both died a tree away from each other, got shot, and they both died on this property across the street in here. And two brothers that were shot. And you realize brother against brother. And now God's saying, like, hey, I want you to heal that gap. And I want you to come in and I want you to restore the full function of this property. And I think more and more believers are going to start realizing that and walking in it.
Love it. Love it. Um, as we're wrapping up here, I always like to do a section that is called the 615 Rapid Fire. So I'm just going to throw out a couple random questions at you. First thing that comes to mind, you shoot, all right?
Okay.
So you get a billboard on I-65 for 1 full year. What does it say?
Jesus.
Figured you were going to say something like that. Second, um, if not, I would have questioned you. If not, I would have been like, well, what is happening? What is happening? Um, second, describe your idea of a perfect day in Middle Tennessee.
Oh man, that's a great question. Um, Probably a perfect day is in Middle Tennessee is me being out with my family, probably at a park somewhere and not having to, and and probably having fried chicken and sweet tea.
All right.
I'm not allowed to have it right now, so it's becoming more and more of a perfect day when you can't
Okay.
have it all the time. So.
Okay. Well, speaking of fried chicken and tea, favorite Middle Tennessee food spot and dish. And you can't say 1819. So,
No, I would definitely say, well, there's a couple places that I actually am really loving right now. I mean, I could name several of them in Columbia. My wife and I, when we go out to like someplace nice, we like to go over to like Perry's in Franklin, in Cool Springs area. But when we go down to Columbia, I would say there's a place called Bruno's. It's Italian deli place, and Gold's Deli. Gold's Deli is wild. If you've never had the pastrami
okay.
sandwich, it's unbelievable. But then Mama Mila's is right beside Gold's Deli, so I
I
would say
keep
those.
hearing about Mamma Mia's, and I have not been able to make it there. Like
It's
every single person I speak with, they're always like, "Oh, you gotta go, you gotta go."
Yeah, I would say it's
So,
probably number one, but it's the place I'm not allowed to eat that much. So
okay.
it's the big Italian. I mean, her spaghetti sauce is called crack sauce, if it tells you anything. So it's like this is good stuff. It's very addictive.
Oh, this
Not
is
good for a
awesome.
low carb diet. I'm just telling you right now, I'm not allowed to have it. So,
Awesome. And last but not least, other Middle Tennessee people, businesses, or stories that you think I should highlight on the show.
oh man, there's so many incredible things. But I mean, I love it here. We have somebody like Lauren Eckhart, who's a storyteller. We have Aaron Stokes, who runs a thing called Shop Fix, which is like represents thousands of mechanic shops, where he's actually helping raise up people, not just for their mechanic shop, but for their families. We got Legacy Coffee down in Columbia, which is like an amazing coffee shop. And I know we got 1819, but it's one of the first places we landed actually as a coffee trailer. And this guy loves the Lord. And what amazing coffee, great place. So those are some of my favorites.
Love it, love it. So, before we sign off and you tell people how to, learn more about you and connect with you, any parting thoughts, anything that we didn't touch on that you wanted to touch on, that you want, any parting thoughts for the leader, for the listeners, anything?
Yeah. Yeah, I probably would just say like, from the beginning what I talked about is like not letting other things put a metric system on you. You have to ask the Lord, what's the metric system for us? And that's success. And, when I first started pastoring, I asked people, I had 150 people in the room and said, write down three things that you think a pastor is. And I got about 400 answers. And I told them, I can't be all those things to you. That's not even biblical, right? And you got to not let other people and other things always determine your metric system. I think you got to find the people that you can trust and that are good elders in your life or are good influences in your life. And even what you're doing on this podcast is an amazing thing to be able to grab other people and say like, man, I need to listen to that guy. I need to listen to that podcast more. It's like, because there's certain things that come alive in you when you hear it and you realize, oh, they're not trying to set a metric system for me. They're trying to help me understand how I can grow, how I can learn, how I can build. But when you start taking this as a metric system, then I would look like a failure because I haven't multiplied the churches into multiple sites. I haven't taken on more church services. But I had to ask the Lord, what's success to you right now? And what are you asking me to do? And then I run that by our leadership and say, like, hey, do you feel any different than this? Because I will take your opinion on this. And each one of them was like, no, we feel like we're doing what we're supposed to do right now. So I would just say, don't let other people set your metric system. Know who you are, be confident in the identity God's given you, and then be satisfied with that, right? Because some people be like, I'll only be satisfied when I have a 5,000 person church. And you're like, okay, well, is that a God thing or is that just you and what
Yeah.
you desire, right? I'll only be, if I can get a number one or if I can have 3 million listens on this song. And you're like, okay, but that's not necessarily a God metric. That's a metric system put by the world. So I would just challenge people to, you ask God, what does the metric system need to be? Get around good advisors. But Proverbs says no man goes to war without a multitude of counsel. So I get a lot of counsel. I have elders in my life. I have people here who are elders in my life and leaders in my life. So I just encourage you in that.
Awesome. Awesome. And what is the best way for people to stay up to date, connect with you, anything?
Yeah, I think hope you see Nashville, .com if you want to check that out, or you can check it out on any of the socials. Here Be Lions, it's HereBeLions. I have to say that out loud because we got one time we did an event with 20,000 people, and up on the sandwich board where they put all the names of the speakers, it was like John Maxwell, it was like Coach K from Duke, and then it was us, and it said Here Be Loins. And so that's a little bit of a, but as a business person, I almost bought HereBeLoins.com and turned it into either a barbecue restaurant or into an underwear store. So here we own Here Be Loins. And Here Be Lions and then Here Be Dustin is my Instagram stuff. So, all the information for those kind of things. We have albums if you want to listen to the music. We just released a new album on Here Be Lions. You can find that on Spotify or on iTunes. And then Hope You See Nashville starting to release songs, which I'm really excited about. And we just released a song called In Over My Head, and we released one before that called More Than Anything with Cat Husky on it, and super exciting stuff. So, those are probably the best ways to connect.
Awesome. Pastor Dustin, thank you so much. This was
It's an
awesome.
honor. Love doing
Thank you.
it. Thanks for letting me do it.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone you think would find it interesting. Until next time, thank you for tuning in.